The person stepping out of that car, the one double parked in front of the restaurant, the one with the personalized plates and the paint color that costs extra at the dealership, might have $200 in their checking account right now. That's not a dramatic hypothetical designed to get your attention. That's a description of a real category of person that exists in serious numbers across this country. And here's the part nobody talks about openly. Some of them make $184,000 a year. Not a side hustle, not a startup that just got lucky, a real documented annual income that puts them in a category most Americans working full-time will never reach. And they are still somehow running out of month before they run out of paycheck. So before we get into what $184,000 actually means, what percentile you're sitting in, who else is at that number with you, and what the data says about what tends to happen next, I want you to hold that image for a second. The car, the restaurant, the checking account with $200 in it. Because the thing quietly operating in that picture has a name, and by the end of this video, you're going to recognize it every time you see it, including, possibly, when you look at your own accounts. I'm Matt. This channel is about what your money is actually doing versus what you think it's doing, and what you can do about the gap between those two things. If that sounds useful, subscribe. Let's get into it.
Here's a number that most people get spectacularly wrong. Ask someone, a coworker, a neighbor, a person at a dinner party after one glass of wine, what income puts you in the top 10% of individual earners in the United States? And they'll say something like $300,000, maybe $400,000. Some people guess $500,000 because they're thinking about athletes and executives and the people they see profiled in magazines. The number feels big because wealth in American culture tends to be associated with a kind of visibility that requires a lot of money to sustain. The actual threshold for the top 10% of individual earners is $155,000. That's it. If you earn $155,000 a year, individually, not as a household, you are already ahead of 90% of every person earning a paycheck in this country. The median individual income sits at $53,000. The average is just under $78,000. The top 5% starts at $210,000. Which means $184,000, the number in the title, lands right in that band, comfortably above the top 10% threshold. Not top 5%, not top 1%, but somewhere in the range of the top 7 to 8% of individual earners in the United States. Do you actually know what percentile you're in? Not your household income, not your partner's earnings combined with yours, you, individually, with what you earn. Take a second with that question, because most people genuinely don't know. And that gap between where you actually sit and where you think you sit is where the first problem lives. Because when you don't know where you stand, you calibrate your lifestyle to your environment, not to the data. You compare yourself to the people around you, the colleagues with the slightly nicer apartments, the friends who just bought in a suburb you couldn't have touched 3 years ago, the people on your feed whose vacations and renovations and new cars create a background hum of, this is what people like us do. And if everyone in that environment is in your general income range, their spending feels normal. Their upgrades feel like the baseline. Their choices feel like the reasonable next step. That is precisely where lifestyle inflation starts. Not with a reckless decision, not with a moment of clear irresponsibility you can look back on and identify. It starts with normal, with quietly upgrading to whatever the people around you consider standard for someone at your income level. A $300 monthly difference in a car payment doesn't feel like a serious financial decision. Moving from $500 to $800 a month, that's $3,600 a year. Over 25 years invested instead at a conservative 8% annual return, that single decision costs $263,000. Not into a catastrophe, not into something that felt remotely dramatic at the time, into a slightly nicer lease that felt like the obvious next step given where things were going. That's how lifestyle inflation operates. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't feel like excess. It feels like progress, like you're finally living at the level you've been working toward. And that feeling is exactly what makes it so effective at quietly consuming the financial difference between where you are and where you could be. Picture two people. Same city, similar careers, both moving into real income in their early 30s. One earns $184,000 as a senior manager. The other earns $190,000 in a different industry. Both believe they're on track. Both are making good money by any reasonable standard. The difference is that one of them treats every salary increase as an invitation to expand their fixed monthly costs. New apartment, new car, new services, new subscriptions that quietly become permanent. The other one keeps fixed costs relatively flat and routes the difference into investment accounts that don't touch checking. 10 years later, the gap in their net worth is not a small rounding error. It is a number that would genuinely shock both of them, built almost entirely from the difference between automatic spending and deliberate non-spending. Not from talent, not from luck, from pattern. So what is the hidden pay raise? It is not a bonus, not a promotion, not a second job or a negotiation, or a title change that unlocks a new salary band. The hidden pay raise is the return your investments are generating, quietly, in the background, completely independent of whether you show up to work tomorrow. And the reason most high earners never feel it is that they never leave room for it to actually accumulate. Here's the calculation that tends to stop people mid-sentence. $50,000 invested at age 40 at a 7% average annual return compounds to $216,000 by age 65. The same $50,000 invested at age 55 reaches $108,000 by the same milestone, exactly half, not because of any difference in intelligence or effort or risk tolerance, just time. 15 years of compounding that either happened or didn't happen, depending on whether the money was invested at 40 or spent somewhere between 40 and 55. The people earning $184,000 who are genuinely building wealth are not necessarily running elaborate strategies. They are not picking individual stocks or timing market cycles or accessing financial instruments that require a private banker. They're doing something that sounds almost frustratingly simple. They treat their investment return as a second paycheck, one that never hits their checking account, one they never adjust their spending to accommodate, one that just exists, quietly, compounding year after year, until one day it's generating more income in a single year than their actual salary used to. That's the hidden pay raise. It doesn't show up on a W-2, it doesn't appear in direct deposit, but over 15 years, it can compound into something that dwarfs whatever negotiated salary increase you got last performance cycle. Do you know what your investment accounts returned last year in actual dollar terms? Not as a percentage, but as real money deposited into your future? Most people know the percentage because the app shows it, but the dollar amount requires a calculation, and most people don't do it, which means most people are earning a second income and treating it as an abstraction they'll pay attention to eventually. Write that down. Your investment return is income. It just arrives in a format most people don't recognize as income. Here is the thing about $184,000 specifically, and this is the part that actually matters for this conversation. That income level is high enough that it creates a feeling of room. It feels like there's margin. It feels like you can absorb the nicer apartment and the upgraded car and still be fine. And in the short term, you probably can. The checking account doesn't reach zero. The bills get paid. The automatic transfers go through. Everything looks okay on the surface. But fine and building wealth are not the same condition. Fine is just a more expensive version of staying in place. And staying in place at $184,000 is a significant squandering of a position most people will never hold. The hidden pay raise only compounds if you leave room for it, and most people at $184,000 have filled the room before the paycheck clears. There's also a layer underneath this that nobody calculates out loud. Every dollar that enters your fixed monthly expense column, every recurring cost that pulls automatically without you making an active choice, is a dollar that will never compound. Not just this month, every month, for the rest of the time that cost exists. The subscription you've had for 2 years that you mostly don't use anymore isn't costing you $30 a month. It's costing you the compounded value of $30 a month for however many more years it runs. That math is uncomfortable to actually do, which is probably why most people don't.
Let's talk about the data point that should genuinely stop you. Goldman Sachs surveyed more than 5,100 Americans in a study released in late 2025. Among workers earning between $100,000 and $200,000, the range that includes $184,000, 25% described themselves as primarily living paycheck to paycheck. Among workers earning over $300,000, that number climbed to 40%. Sit with that for a moment. The higher the income, the more likely the person is to feel financially stretched. That is the exact opposite of how this is supposed to work. And yet there it is, in data from one of the most respected financial institutions in the world. What's happening? Lifestyle inflation doesn't stop at the first upgrade. It compounds in the same direction that investments are supposed to compound, except instead of building, it consumes. Every income jump establishes a new spending baseline, a new floor below which it feels like you'd be going backward. And that floor is always slightly higher than the one before it, which means the margin between what comes in and what goes out never really widens, no matter how much the number on the W-2 grows. Your salary is what you earn. Your net worth is what you keep. Only one of those actually makes you rich. That is not a saying designed to sound clever. That is the entire structural insight behind every wealth gap that exists between two people at similar income levels. Because the person earning $184,000 with a net worth of $700,000 is genuinely, meaningfully wealthier than the person earning $300,000 with a net worth of $180,000. The W-2 number is not the scoreboard. The scoreboard is what has actually accumulated, what exists completely independent of next month's direct deposit. Here's the comparison that makes this concrete. Two people, same age, 10-year careers in progress. Person A earns $184,000 and saves 20%, roughly $36,000 a year going into investment accounts. Person B earns $295,000 and saves 8%, about $23,600 a year. Same assumed return, same time horizon. After 20 years, Person A has outpaced Person B by a margin that would surprise anyone who started this comparison by looking only at the gross income number. The savings rate is doing the work. The income is just the raw material. And the math on this is more dramatic than most people expect. Person A at $184,000 saving 20% consistently is putting $36,000 a year into investment accounts. At a 7% average annual return, that's $1.5 million in accumulated wealth after 20 years. Person B at $295,000 saving 8% is putting $23,600 a year to work. Same return, same timeline, they land at just under $1 million. A $111,000 annual income advantage completely erased and then reversed by a 12 percentage point difference in savings rate. That's the thing about high income that most high earners genuinely don't want to hear. It creates the illusion of a margin that lifestyle inflation is very good at eliminating before it ever reaches an investment account. The income grows, the spending grows with it. The savings rate quietly flatlines at a number that sounds responsible but isn't actually moving the needle. And 20 years later, the person who earned less but saved more is sitting on a substantially larger number, not because they were smarter or luckier or had access to something the other person didn't, just because the percentage held. Now, none of this is an argument for eliminating enjoyment from your life. Nobody here is suggesting you eat rice and beans in a studio apartment and feel good about it. That's not a financial philosophy, it's just misery with a spreadsheet, and I want no part of that either. The question isn't whether to spend, the question is whether your spending reflects actual decisions you made, or whether it's the automatic residue of your income going up and your lifestyle following it without anyone consciously choosing that. Look at your recurring fixed expenses right now. Not the groceries, not the dinner out, not the things that vary month to month. The fixed ones, the ones that pull automatically. How many of those did you actively choose? And how many of them just appeared because your income created room? That distinction is worth more than almost any financial advice I could give you.
Here is what this actually looks like in practice. And I want to be specific because vague advice at this income level is not useful to anyone. The framework that separates people who actually build wealth at $184,000 from people who stay financially neutral at $184,000 is not about deprivation. It is entirely about sequencing. The first rule of the sequence: retirement accounts get funded before lifestyle decisions get made. Not alongside, not after, before. Whatever tax advantage space you have access to, 401k, IRA, whatever your employer offers, that gets filled first. Because money that goes directly into those accounts doesn't get a chance to become a streaming service you added during a free trial and never canceled. It doesn't linger in checking long enough to become a decision you make passively. It disappears in the right direction before your spending pattern can absorb it. After the retirement accounts, a fixed automatic transfer to an investment account set up in advance on the same day every month. Not whatever's left at the end of the month, because there is never anything left at the end of the month if you don't designate it first. A fixed amount,
moved automatically, decided once, and then invisible. What remains after those two moves? Spend it on whatever you want, genuinely. No guilt, no tracking, no elaborate budgeting system that you'll abandon in 3 weeks. The structure does the work, so the rest of your life doesn't have to. And here's the thing I want to be honest about, because a lot of financial content implies you have to gut your life to build real wealth, which is not true and also deeply annoying as a message. The vacation is not the problem. I want to say that clearly. A week somewhere you've been wanting to go, a trip you planned, budgeted, looked forward to, and actively chose is not lifestyle inflation. That is living a life worth building toward. The vacation is the point. The car lease that auto-renewed because it was easier than dealing with it. The apartment upgrade that happened because it seemed like the right move for where you are now, even though it added $700 a month to your fixed costs. The 11 subscription services, each pulling between $15 and $50 a month that you genuinely haven't thought about in 6 months. Those are the problem, not the vacation. The vacation is a deliberate expense. The other stuff is just automatic. There's research on this worth knowing. People who identified and canceled recurring expenses they weren't actively using, averaging around $200 a month, and redirected that amount to investment accounts, saw an additional $143,000 accumulate over 15 years at a 7% return. Not from earning more, not from a smarter investment strategy, from stopping the quiet, automatic bleed of money leaving their accounts without a real decision being made. That is not frugality, that is paying attention. Here's the action I want you to take before the end of this week, not someday, this week. Pull up your bank account and look at everything that auto pulls. Add it up. Then ask yourself one question. If your income had stayed flat for the past 3 years, which of these would still be here? The ones that would have disappeared are the ones that aren't decisions. They're just lifestyle inflation on autopilot. That list is where your hidden pay raise comes from, not from earning more, from stopping the leak.
One thing worth being honest about before this wraps up, not everyone at $184,000 is looking at the same picture. If you're in New York or San Francisco or another genuinely high-cost market, the math adjusts significantly. If you have children in expensive care situations, if you're carrying significant debt from a degree that was required to get you to this income level, if you came into this salary later in your career and have less runway for compounding to do its work, the numbers look different. This is not a one-size prescription. Context matters, and anyone who tells you otherwise is selling you something. But the pattern holds across almost every context. Income rises, lifestyle follows automatically without anyone making a conscious choice to expand. The gap between what comes in and what stays narrows, and sometimes it reverses entirely until you find yourself in the top 10% of earners in the most prosperous country in the world and still somehow feeling financially stressed at the end of every month. Not because the income isn't enough, because the pattern around the income is consuming it faster than it arrives. The enemy in that story is not low income. It is automation, the version of yourself that treats every raise as permission to upgrade every fixed cost in your life to match. And that version doesn't need willpower to beat. It needs a structure that moves money before the expansion can happen. Because willpower runs out, structures don't. Go back to that car in the parking lot, the expensive one, the personalized plates. Maybe the person driving it has done everything right. Maybe the car is paid off, their net worth is strong, their investment accounts are well funded, and the car is a deliberate choice made with full information about exactly where they stand. That's a real possibility, and if that's the situation, great, enjoy the car. But the statistics suggest something else is more likely. They suggest that the car payment is one of several fixed costs that expanded automatically after an income increase without a conscious decision being made, that the checking account is doing just enough, that the investment account is underfunded relative to what this income level should be capable of building, that the hidden pay raise, the compounding, the returns, the second income that never comes in a paycheck has never really been allowed to accumulate because the lifestyle always expanded first and the room was always already full by the time the investment account came up. Your salary is what you earn. Your net worth is what you keep. The person who really makes over $184,000 a year, in the sense that actually matters, is not necessarily the one with the nicest car in the lot. It's the one whose net worth is growing in the background on a schedule that has nothing to do with next month's direct deposit in an account that doesn't get touched when the restaurant check comes. The question worth asking yourself right now is not what you earn, it's what you keep.